Good afternoon. Welcome to ET Auto Live. Today we are going to have a recap of financial year 2021. This was certainly one of the toughest year that I have seen in my lifetime. And we have to understand how this year is going to be the 2022. What are the pundits, industry pundits expect from this year at the backdrop of second wave of coronavirus? This is becoming deadlier. What kind of numbers we expect in FY 2022 in the when it comes to automobile sales segment wise? To discuss this and put light on this, a lot of pertinent question that is being posed due to the current situation and what happened in the last year when we had intermittent disturbance in terms of supply chain, in terms of demand, and a whole lot of things that we suffered in the last year. Let me introduce to you today's Power Pack panel, Mr. Ajay Srinivasan. He is Director, Crystal Research. He will be giving you an overview of the situation, what happened in 2021, and what does he feel like in terms of market in 2022. We also have Mr. Ashok Taneja, industry veteran, Managing Director, and Chief Mentor, Shriram Pistons and Rings. He is also the past president of Automotive Component Manufacturers Association. We also have Mr. John K. Paul. He is the past president, FADA, Federation of Automobile Dealers Association, and also one of the largest dealer for country's largest vehicle manufacturer, Maruti Suzuki India. We also have Mr. Nitin Seth, who is Chief Operating Officer of Ashok Leyland. Ashok Leyland is India's one of the largest commercial vehicle manufacturer. He will be talking about the commercial vehicle side of the business. We also have Mr. Shashank Srivastava, Executive Director of Marketing Sales at Maruti Suzuki India Limited. Of course, Maruti Suzuki, one of the largest passenger vehicle manufacturer in the country, having about 50% of the market share. We also have Mr. Y.S. Guleria, Director Sales and Marketing, Honda Motorcycles and Scooters India Limited. Honda Motorcycles is country's second largest in terms of volume and of course one of the biggest in many areas. Thank you so much, Mr. Guleria, for joining in. We also have Mr. Vinkesh Gulati, current president of FADA, Federation of Automobile Dealers Association. It is very important to understand how do the real face of the automobile industry, they are the dealership, how are they dealing with the crisis, and what are the insight coming from the counter, how the customer is behaving when it comes to vehicle buying. So these are the grand panel that we have today, and everyone is an authority in their respective segments. So before we start this session, I must tell you that you can ask your question by commenting it in the etauto.com micro website, that where it is being viewed, and we will be out of all the social media platform where we are right now live. All the detailed panel discussion can only be viewed at the etauto.com. So invite you all to join us at etauto.com. Let me begin by inviting Ajay Srinivasan to give us a quick view of what happened in 2021 and what is there in store in 2022 before we start the discussion. Welcome, Ajay. Can you please give us a sense of what happened in the last year and how does it look like in this financial year and going forward?
Yeah, thank you, Nabil, and thanks to ET Auto for giving us opportunity.
Ajay, you are on mute.
I think I have released my mute. I'm audible now? Yeah, sure. Thanks, Nabil, and thanks to ET Auto for giving us the opportunity to present our views. Like Nabil rightly outlined.
Ajay, we are not able to.
Am I audible now?
Yes, yes.
Very okay. Sorry. Thanks, Nabil, and thanks to the ET Auto team for having us over here. It's indeed, like Nabil rightly pointed out, fiscal 21 has been a year like no year in the past for the auto sector. We started the year with despair because of the lockdown. As we stepped onto the second half of the year, there was some glimmer of hope with the demand picking up. And by the time we were in February, I think most of the industry participants were fairly optimistic about the way things were panning out. Yes, there were some challenges in some segments. And now again, this second wave of COVID has again come to really set an uncertain path for the future for the sector. Nevertheless, our sense is that fiscal 22 should be a far better year for the auto sector. If not anything, because I think we have learned from what happened in fiscal 21 and some of the challenges in terms of getting the production engine firing, some of the challenges in terms of managing the labor. This time around, it will be far more smoother. And of course, no government can afford production activities completely coming to an halt, given the implications it will have on both tax revenues and economic growth. With this context, I will try to focus more on fiscal 22. I'll touch upon what happened in fiscal 21. I have a small presentation which I will just load. Just give me a minute. I hope the presentation is visible.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is just to give the context on how we expect the macro to pan out. Clearly, I think we are looking at double-digit growth for fiscal 21-22. Now, what we are seeing in some states like Maharashtra right now may shave a few basis points here and there from this number. But our sense is we should still end with double-digit growth in fiscal 21-22. But if you look at this growth in the context of what has happened in the last couple of years, it is not something to be extremely proud about. For example, in fiscal 21-22, our real GDP or our nominal GDP will be only 2 or 3 percentage points higher than what it was in fiscal 20. So in a way, we are actually going to have almost negligible growth for 2 years cumulative put together. That obviously is going to have an impact on all sectors, including the auto industry. We are already seeing some repercussions of this scenario on some segments. We will talk about it in more detail when we go forward. And what we are also seeing in terms of the recovery, it's going to be a uncertain, uneven, and two-speed recovery. What do I mean by this? There will be certain pockets which will recover faster compared to the other pockets. Amongst customer segments, if I demarcate the market into lower middle class, upper middle class, and the rich, you will see that in segments where you have larger dependence on the lower middle class and possibly the middle class, there the growth will be slower compared to the upper section of the society, because indeed in the pandemic, you have seen that the lower middle class has actually faced the biggest brunt on incomes. And that is very clearly when you look at some segments like scooters, for example, scooters and motorcycles, for example, where the economy segment has really struggled to perform. Another point which we'll be watching out is how does the fiscal deficit pan out, because that will have implications on government's ability to spend, as well as the outlook for the commercial vehicle segments and the other segments which are dependent on infrastructure. The other point which is very critical from the auto industry perspective is what happens to interest rates and inflation. Inflation, clearly we are expecting inflation to come down slightly from fiscal 21 levels. But given the large borrowing program which the government has, we feel that the yield curve, especially at the longer end, would actually start increasing. You would actually see the 10-year GSEC touch close to 6.5% by the end of March in fiscal 22. What does it mean for the auto industry? It may not immediately result in higher loan costs. Interest rates will still be fairly benign, given that banks especially are flush with liquidity. And given that they are flush with liquidity, they would like to actually lend to customer segments and profiles which are reasonably comfortable. Therefore, bank interest rates may not actually move immediately, but definitely you would see that the free fall in interest rates which you saw in the last couple of years That is certainly behind us. And from here on, interest rates will either stay stable or marginally go upward. Now, if I look at how the scenario has panned out in the last 15, 20 years or so, and here we have looked at long tail data to look at how has really growth panned out over multiple cycles, right? If I look at this chart, 3 to 8 was the year of high growth for the Indian economy. We saw very strong growth for both corporate revenue growth as well as nominal GDP. And this was purely because of the investment boom we had at this point of time. We also saw India gaining market share in exports. But after the global financial crisis in 2008 and subsequent policy logjam in the last 2 to 3 years of the UPA government, we have seen that the growth rates have started trending downwards. In fact, if you look at the growth in nominal GDP for fiscal 21, this is actually one of the lowest. I think it's almost trending towards negative. And for the top companies also, you're seeing growth is actually in a negative territory, which clearly says that fiscal 21 was in general a very, very challenging year for the economy. And in fact, in fiscal 20 itself, you saw that many companies were struggling. The economic growth was actually on the slower side. And this actually multiplied the pain which we saw in fiscal 21. While fiscal 22 will be much better, we must all recollect and remember that this is of a very, very low base. And growth, if anything, will be optical. In many segments, we will not actually go back to either fiscal 20 or fiscal 19 numbers. Now, this is one chart which I'll try to spend little time on. So in this chart, what we have done is we have tried to decipher how our income is going to move, right? And this we believe is very critical indicator of how really auto consumption and demand for automobiles is going to move. So here what we have done is we have, as per our estimate, this is how the entire income pool breaks up around for corporate India, for government, for rural and agri, promoters income and others. So here, as you can see from this chart, our estimate is that the wage bill for corporate India is around 18 trillion. And we have looked at a sample of around 40,000 entities, which constitute around 65% of this 18 trillion. To actually see as to what is really going to happen to salary hikes and as a result the incomes for this part of India which is dependent on the corporate India growth, right? So as you can see in fiscal 21, we saw that across the board, whether it's the top 800 companies, the next 4,000 companies, also the bottom run companies amongst this 40,000 set, we saw that income salary hikes were very negligible. If anything, there were decrease in salaries on an average. A lot of the companies deferred bonuses as well. And therefore, the income sentiment was very badly hurt in fiscal 21. In fiscal 22, we expect the larger companies to actually go back to the normal trajectory of about 8 to 9% income growth or salary hikes. But the next 4,000 and the next 32,000 companies will stay lower than the average at about 4 to 5%. In fact, if you look at few of the sectors like IT services, FMCG, pharmaceuticals, etc., we are already seeing that a lot of the companies are giving reasonable salary hikes. And this itself is actually portends well from the point of view of urban incomes. What we must also keep in mind is that earlier, a lot of the consumers used to spend on other avenues like movies, entertainment, traveling, holidays, and also on other discretionary spends as well. Now, a lot of those discretionary spends are coming down, and therefore some of this portion, it's possible that the consumers would actually devote towards making their own life more safe and comfortable. So therefore, you are actually seeing that the demand for something like a passenger vehicle is actually gaining quite a bit of traction. Now, if I go further lower into corporate India, if I look at companies outside these 40,000 companies, which will largely be the MSMEs, the smaller companies, the informal segment where the data is not widely reported, there most of these companies are still going through quite a bit of pain. And again, this localized lockdowns, night curfews, and all the other events which we're seeing playing around us would have an impact more on this segment and not so much on the white collar employees who belong to the top echelons of corporate India in terms of the employment. So therefore, we are likely to see in this particular segment, there will still be a little bit of pain. As per our analysis, MSME segment continues to hurt, notwithstanding the support which the government has given, whether it's emergency credit line scheme and all the other support which the government has given. The segment continues to hurt, and that would have implications for people employed in these segments, people who are part of the MSME ecosystem, and that would actually result in slower demand from the lower middle class, which would continue to impact certain segments within both passenger vehicles as well as the two-wheeler segment. On the government side, as you can see, the growth has been fairly steady. We saw growth, there was growth in salaries even in fiscal 21. This is taken from the state budgets as well as the documents, economic surveys put out by state governments. Here again, we can see growth has been fairly steady, and fiscal 22, the growth should be much stronger compared to fiscal 21. On the rural side, we have seen that 2 consecutive years of successful good monsoon. If the SkyMet forecast is right, we are looking at the 3rd consecutive year of good monsoon in fiscal 22. This indeed portends well for the agri demand, the rural demand. Although I must say that the rural demand is not only agri today, you also have a bit of manufacturing. You have quite a bit of services as well in rural. But broadly, from the rural perspective, I would say that because of the government support and because of the fact that farm incomes are actually being quite strong, we would continue to see better demand or strong demand from the rural side. Just one slide on the rural incomes. We have tried to give a sense on both field crop as well as horticulture crop profitability. It is very rare for India to see 3 consecutive years of good and well-distributed monsoons. So if indeed we see good monsoons in fiscal 21, fiscal 22, we should actually really be thanking our stars, and it would indeed be unprecedented. We have also seen a lot of support to the rural incomes because of government schemes like Narega and PM Kisan. On the profitability side, our sense is field crop profitability has been very strong. Horticulture, there has been slight dip in profitability on a per hectare basis, but nevertheless, the incomes are very strong on the rural side. And with continued government support, as well as a good monsoon and reservoir levels also being at very comfortable levels, our sense is rural should continue to do well in fiscal 22 as well. I talked about the growth being largely optical, and this is very, very clear when I look at the top 800 companies. So this is the top 800 companies from the listed universe for whom you get the quarterly data. So as you can see, we are actually moving in a very narrow range, right? In fiscal 19, these companies, which supposedly are the stronger companies with better balance sheets and with better pricing power compared to the smaller companies, they actually saw decline in revenues in fiscal 20. In 21 as well, they saw decline in revenues. In 22, they are likely to see strong growth in revenues. But if I compare their revenues in fiscal 22 to fiscal 19 levels, we are looking at about 8 to 9% growth. So this clearly shows that what kind of a setback COVID has been for the Indian economy. It also clearly shows that while fiscal 22 growth would be there, it will be largely optical. And this growth also, I would say, has been supported to a large extent by sectors like IT services, pharmaceuticals, and to some extent the consumer discretionary services and FMCG as well.
Thank you, Ajay. In the interest of time, I'll have to hold you here. We'll get into the presentation side after the discussion gets over. And that's a beautifully put. Some numbers really excite us that things are not going to be that bad. Looking at the economy, the GDP growth that you are projecting, the situation you are projecting for 2021. But before we get more into the data and number, let's understand from the industry veterans what do they think. So I request if you could unpin your presentation, and we can go back to this presentation after the discussion is over. Then we can see into this presentation also.
Yeah, sure. So Nabil, if you can give me 2 minutes, I can possibly then just give a sense on our numbers, and that could set the context if it's
Yeah,
fine.
just if you could put the projection quickly. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so these are our projections for fiscal 22. I think, as you can see, we are looking at 24 to 25% growth for passenger vehicles. And I think we are seeing multiple challenges on the supply side, whether it is chips, whether it is specialty steel, and even the global container shortage, which we are seeing now. So there are multiple challenges on the supply side in passenger vehicles. That is, I would say, the bigger challenge now compared to the demand side challenge. We are seeing some trends in terms of alternate fuel like CNG gaining traction. Two-wheelers, as you can see, we're looking at 13 to 15% growth, which is lower than the numbers which we did in fiscal 19, and barely, I think, maybe slightly lower than the numbers we did in fiscal 20 as well. Commercial vehicles, I think it will be contingent upon the infrastructure spending by the government. We are looking at a range of about 7.5 lakh to 8.5 lakh thousand units. And tractors, like I mentioned, we are looking at continued growth because of the agri side being very strong. So on a very strong growth in fiscal 21, we're looking at about 7 to 5 to 10% growth.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks.
Those are really very positive and exciting numbers, but let's understand from the pundits what do they think. Thank you so much once again. And we are also joined by Mr. Arun Malhotra, indeed one of the industry veterans. He was the former president, managing director of Nissan Motor India. He's one of the stalwarts of automobile industry. Thank you so much, Mr. Malhotra, for joining in. Before we get into the numbers that has been thrown by Ajay, it looks pretty exciting also, and too optimistic, if I can say, because looking at the second wave of COVID, do you think this number is possible in terms of passenger vehicle segment? Shashank, what's your thought?
Yeah, so
24% growth.
yeah, so I think the growth numbers over this year's financial 2020-21 is probably not a correct way of looking at the market. You will have growth because you had a very low base, especially in the first quarter. And we keep joking amongst ourselves in sales that will definitely show growth in April, because last April was zero sales. So we are very confident of showing growth in April. But that's one of the reasons why we say that looking at growth may not be, but let's look at the volumes. And I think if you look at the quarter to quarter volumes, especially if you go by retail, last year's number were similar to what you had in the industry in 2019-20. Wholesale was down about 2.2%. Overall, 27.71 lakh against 27.77 lakh the previous year. So 2.2% down. But retail was more or less similar as last year's number. So I think going forward, we have healthy bookings in the industry. The industry stock beginning of March is just around 130,000, which is pretty low considering retails of almost 300,000 a month in the last few months. So I think except for the supply side, which can be a major issue, we have, I think Ajay referred in his presentation to this threat of the supply side. And, in Maruti Suzuki, we were used to talk about just-in-time supply chain management. We are now talking of just-in-case supply management. Just in case if something happens, what would happen? So we have left that just-in-time behind for just-in-case. And that is the predicament, the apprehension which OEMs have for making future projections. While if you look at the GDP growth, the nominal GDP growth projected around 16.5%. Ajay showed in his slide how, with the inflation rate of around 5% expected, we could have a real GDP growth of around 11%. And auto demand is very closely correlated with the GDP growth per capita. And there is a correlation of almost 0.9836, which is a pretty high correlation. But the problem with auto, Nabil, is that it is also in economic terms what we call discretionary product. discretionary products require sentiments to be positive. It is like ladies buying ornaments, gold ornaments or diamond ornaments. They have to be in a good mood to buy it. It's not just about having money. So I think that is where the big question mark is. And at Maruti Suzuki, we keep telling our people, we are probably predicting the future might be difficult. So we have to sort of create that future. And that is what we are looking at day by day, because taking a day at a time, month by month. And I think this COVID thing is so difficult to predict. And sentiments, Nabil, I have been saying this earlier, I say it again, even if I'm repeating it, they have a disproportionate effect on sales. So you could have in positive sentiments, almost an irrational sort of growth in sales. But if it is negative, you could also have an equally irrational drop in sales. So I would say, going by the current levels of stocks, going by the current pending bookings, the bookings flow, etc., we have sort of industry prediction seems to be slightly less than what Ajay has predicted. We are looking at a range of around maybe about 31.5 to 32.9 lakhs, that sort of range, which will still be a growth of just around 20%. But growth is not what we should be looking at. And remember, Nabil, one final point before I let the others in, which is that we are still way away from the highs that we have seen in 18-19. Last year, the industry was 20% off that high. We have to remember that, because what we keep hearing in the media is we have seen the highest October, the highest November, the highest December, the highest Q3, the highest Jan, highest Feb, highest March, highest Q4, highest H2, and so on and so forth. It's all compressed in the last 9 months. And therefore, it's a little misleading. We have to see the highs which we achieved. And I think going forward, we are looking at GDP growth only in Q3 to match those 18-19 figures. So I think you will see, if everything goes well, you will probably see a really good H2. And we have to be careful how it goes. As I said, instead of predicting it, I would rather be creating it.
Perfect. Shashank, you rightly pointed that the sentiment is going to play a pivotal role when we are going to talk about the future. But it looks like still, what I understand from the industry, the impact or the fear of coronavirus has almost, not have the same potential that it had last year around this time, when even the cases were lower. People are expecting the business to be almost as usual or closer to the normal. That's what we have seen till now. The numbers are so high. We have not heard any news of plant being shut like last year. So that's a positive sense. Before I get into the future of 2021, let's recap the 2021. What happened actually? What were the key takeaways? What were the learning when we have such veterans around us? I'll start with you, Mr. Taneja. You are one of the largest supplier of pistons in India. That is one of the important components that is used in two-wheeler, four-wheeler, everywhere. So just want to understand, what were the key learning from the last 1 year of this VUCA situation, that's extreme VUCA situation that never we had seen in our lifetime, professional lifetime or lifetime. So what has been your key learning for such a veteran like you, and that you would like to probably pass on to the industry also?
Thank you, Nabil. If I was to point to one item which defines the auto and component industry in 2021, it would be the outstanding spirit of partnership demonstrated by the OEMs and the component industry. We went through an unprecedented crisis, but we saw unprecedented cooperation. The second feature would be the rollout of BS6 was extremely smooth. When I say BS6, I include in that the new safety norms which came into being. I think the component industry measured up to the expectations of the OEMs. There were no glitches. There were no hiccups. It was a smooth rollout. The third thing is that we went from a situation of complete uncertainty and despair in the beginning of the year to good hopes ignited in the middle of the year. And once again, a situation where we are looking at uncertainty due to COVID-2. In this situation, I think the component industry learned a few great lessons. Most important being, don't try to predict the future. You cannot forecast the future. It is too uncertain. It is better to prepare for the future. It is better to have a response mechanism available so you can react to whatever the future, what kind of hand it plays out for you. The next thing was a very important realization in the component industry that tier 2 is one of our weaker links. We need to handhold them not only during the period of a crisis, but as a long-term commitment to maintaining a robust and dependable supply chain. Thankfully, we saw no production lines stop due to inability of the component industry to meet requirements. Yes, there were glitches. Some changes in production plans were called for. But by and large, we avoided stoppage of lines. And at the same time, despite this crisis, we avoided all kinds of bankruptcies. You don't hear of bankruptcies in the component sector. This came out of a spirit of partnership, which is what I referred to right in the beginning. So many lessons learned in the last year, which are going to come in handy as we move on into the next year. Just one final comment. The component industry also discovered the value of creating trust. The way our workforce measured up to our expectations for sudden ramping up of the production requirements was really praiseworthy. Managements that had invested in building trust with their workforce were able to deal with this more smoothly, more easily than managements who had invested less in this. So building trust with employees, with tier 2s, and partnering with OEMs, I feel came out as the highlight of the last year. And we were able to measure up to the expectations.
Thank you, Mr. Taneja. Certainly, collaboration was the key for all segments, be it dealer OEM or component OEM. Mr. Seth, commercial vehicle has been one of the troubled business segment for the last few years, and especially after Corona. What kind of impact you had, and how do you see that overcoming in the next year?
I think thanks, Nabil. All the industries in, let's say, if I divide commercial vehicle into three parts, one is medium and heavy, then we have buses, and third is, let's say, light commercial vehicle. All the three behaved in a different way in the last year. And as one of my colleagues said on the call, the first half was really a washout because industry didn't work. The biggest sufferer in the Corona time was the buses, because none of the state transports were buying buses because there was no public to transport upon. So the bus industry went down by 82%. No school buses, no state transport buses. So I'll say that industry as a buses was total washout. The medium and heavy, which went down by 28% last year, actually recovered quite well in the second half, but it did not recover well all the segments. The tippers, where government is putting a lot of money on road constructions, on the various projects. I think the tipper went up well. Slowly, intermediate commercial vehicle, which are used quietly in e-commerce and, let's say, a short haul, they went up very, very well as a market. Intermediate commercial vehicle went up well. The bigger trucks, which I'll say long haul, maybe quite linked to the economy GDP because there is a 1:1 relationship, was suffering, but I'll say last quarter was quite good. The light commercial vehicle, which was, I'll say, the winner, only went down by 7%. Now, it recovered a lot of ground in the 9 months. One of the reasons, I can say, is about consumption, because, when we were sitting at home and lockdown, you were consuming more. Therefore, e-commerce companies picked up a lot of vehicles. If you ask me, the BS6, we were much worried about the light commercial vehicle having a drop in the volumes because BS6 price increase was very high for light commercial vehicles. But that is one segment which actually went up very well because e-commerce, consumptions, fruits and vegetables, this segment picked up well. I think the three segments behave differently. Going forward, I'm actually quite aligned with what Ajay presented in terms of the growth. I'm also in the view, the 30 to 50%, leave aside the current lockdown, which might have a disruption of supply chain, especially Maharashtra, because Maharashtra is one of the biggest supply chain partnerships coming from Pune, Nasik, all those Kolhapur belt. Because if some components don't come, actually the line will stop in the various plants across the country. After 2-3 days, the line will stop. So if the lockdown doesn't persist more, this year 30 to 50% growth is actually doable in commercial vehicles. I'm very hopeful state transports, which deferred all their purchase last year, will come back. Some of the state transports already we have won tenders, and I'm sure they will take deliveries of this vehicle in this current year. I'm expecting 30 to 50% growth should happen. If leave aside this current COVID, there's a shock if you have in the first month. If it doesn't persist, this is one area I'll say we should do quite well as a commercial vehicles industry, both in buses, trucks, and the highest of them all should be actually LCV growth, which I say is very correlated to I'll say the lower side of the car purchase as well as tractors and two-wheelers. See, if you want to see a mirror image of LCV, you should look at the lower end cars, tractors and two-wheelers. You'll see there is a very high correlation between these three product range for light commercial vehicles. Higher vehicles is mainly very, very highly dependent on GDP. If GDP grows by 11.5%, you should expect construction industry to boom. You expect manufacturing to boom. Therefore, medium and heavy should do well. I think it should be a good year. Leave aside in case there is no shock other than the first month.
Thank you, Mr. Seth. Before I go to the face of the industry, dealer community, I will just bring in Mr. Malhotra here and understand, as an independent observer of the industry and a person who has been tracking the industry, part of the industry for over 3 decades now, how did you see this 2021? And what are your key takeaways, and what would be your message for your counterparts? What are the key takeaways that they can have and embrace when they plan or fix a strategy for the going forward?
So thanks, Nabil. I think 1 or 2 points mentioned by my esteemed panelist. One was about how quickly the industry recovered to gear up production, and that was across segments. The second part was the clear cooperation, coordination, whether you call it symphony, synchronization, or you can make it synchronous gear. That was something which was visible. But if you look, it's been very different in different segments. Look at tractor industry. Not only it has grown 24%, it has achieved an all-time high figure of 9 lakhs. And the previous highest was 8 lakhs. So it is 12.5% more than the all-time highest. One of my panelists mentioned that two-wheelers and tractors generally go hand in hand. But if you look at it, this year tractors have grown 24%, touching the all-time highest, and two-wheelers are down by 13%. And if you took the all-time highest, it's down by nearly 25 to 26%. So clearly, that relationship has not happened. And I will put 2-3 reasons for it. One is the focus on personal mobility, which has helped some segments. Clearly, in cars, it has helped. But in two-wheelers, although there was a very good start, and if you look at the figures till September, cars, passenger vehicles, and two-wheelers were both declining by 33%. But by the end of the year, the passenger vehicle industry is only -3, whereas two-wheelers is -13. So clearly, two major segments of two-wheelers. One is the school, colleges. That is closed for 2 virtually seasons. A lot of people who worked in industry, small jobs, who needed two-wheelers, today, most of them are working from home. So they are impacted to that extent. But having said that, and the other thing which is important is that shared mobility, which was a buzzword, has somewhere fallen by the wayside. Look at three-wheelers, declined by 66%. And also the shared mobility, and along with that, the EV revolution we talked a lot about. Last year, 0.25% of the industry only in cars and 1% or 1.2% in two-wheelers. So clearly it's a mixed bag. And I agree with Shashank, what he says that today you have to create a future. You can't predict, as Mr. Tareja mentioned. You have to go step by step, look at month by month, or I would say an IPL match yesterday, when KKR was going very strong, you have to look ball by ball, over by over, that you are able to achieve. And you have to synchronize or change your strategy. So clearly there is, and definitely I feel the entry levels will continue to be under pressure, because there is where the income has got disrupted, whether it's entry level two-wheelers, not to that extent entry level cars. So clearly a mixed bag, and you can't take things together. I would just want to finish by quoting a very interesting figure. If we have to go back to 2018, in 2022 and 23, that means 4 years after that, in 2021-22, in cars and passenger vehicles, you have to grow by 21%. In two-wheelers, you have to grow by 33%. In commercial vehicles, you have to grow by 50%. And in three-wheelers, you have to grow by 300%. So even if you achieve good figures, and the only figure passenger vehicles I saw 22-23 mentioned, and Shashank was saying that also has to be taken with a pinch of salt. We are in a very vicious cycle. After 5 years, the CGR will be virtually the same. So that's the way I look at this year, which is past by.
Thank you, Mr. Malhotra. I would like to bring in Mr. Guleria here. Two-wheeler, of course, India's two-wheeler industry is one of the largest. As Mr. Malhotra just pointed out, that the entry-level segment is going to suffer. And how was it for the year 2021? How much of rural market did contribute? Because we heard that rural market was the real savior. And do you think this trend continuing in the two-wheeler segment in 2022 also? Or how do you see this panning out? Scooter versus motorcycle, the commuter motorcycle, and which segment you think will be giving you the better advantage in terms of volumes? Do you think the premium segment doing better?
Yeah, well, Nabil, I think the panelists have already set the tone by mentioning about rural, the contribution, the segments. But they actually did not behave normally, which has been the history, in last 5 or 10 years or so. For example, that we know that rural in the beginning was less disturbed on account of the lockdowns. And it was mainly the urban India which was impacted, and the economic activity was still on in the rural India. That means the consumption should have happened. But there was also a reverse migration which increased the load in the rural area. The same family where there were only 4 or 5 members, and then suddenly 8 or 7 members who were to be supported by the same economic activity in the rural India. Initially, it looked like there will be more consumption in the rural, but now once the overall figures are in front of us, what has been impacted in the segment-wise retail contribution or wholesale, even the wholesale contribution to the two-wheeler industry, the contribution of the entry level has gone down. And the level at which it is, like within motorcycle around 54%, that means in last 1 decade, it is the lowest contribution to the within the motorcycle segments of the entry level motorcycles. So that is one point, and it may be related that the lower strata or the economic group was the one which was affected the most, and there were large number of unemployment also. And we also know rural is not only having income from farming. There are allied economic activities, which was also shown in the presentation by Crystal. At the same time, there were interesting facts, like there were some segments like 125cc motorcycles. It has also shown reversely in last 1 decade the highest contribution to the within the motorcycle segment. So every 4th motorcycle today which is being sold is now from the 125cc segment. Now, how do we look at this trend change which has happened? One is that, okay, Mr. Taneja talked about not only the BS4 to BS6, but there were also the brake norms which has come. That was another regulation. So ABS came into the 100 above 125cc. The price point also changed. So there were large segment which wanted probably to buy a 150cc motorcycle. Now there is a cost of BS6 upgradation as well as the regulation of ABS. So the price points are different. So they have gone for the 125cc instead of going for a 150cc motorcycle. So those shifts probably is the one which made this scenario change. But at the same time, once we talk about the discretionary spends, again, we saw that in every segment of the two-wheelers, the topmost segment was the one which contributed the more. So how do we look at it? There is, downfall in the economy, but the consumption of the highest variant, irrespective of entry-level motorcycles, 125cc motorcycle, even in the scooters. Now, 125cc scooters, the contribution has increased. So this change is also one new shift which we are seeing within the segment in the auto industry. And still, what we see as a large hope is the penetration of finance. Retail finance, in fact, is large hope for us, because we had a lot of expectation because government has intervention, RBI also relaxed the norms, NBFCs were indirectly supported. But on ground, the realization of having more finance happening actually was not realized at the network. So overall finance, in fact, dropped by almost 3% in FY21 compared to FY20. So moving forward, if more stability is there, the jobs are back, we believe that there will be a contribution from the retail finance, which will coming as additional support for the two-wheeler industry. So by and large, on a lower base, whatever Crystal has shown, we also believe there will be a double-digit growth. But is it a matter of rejoice or being happy? We also know even this figure may not be even at level of FY20. Let us forget about FY19 when the industry was almost at its peak level. So there are capacities which are already built in the industry. Everybody is having underutilization of these capacities. So the real litmus test will be when industry is able to realize more than 95% of their capacity. That's the thing which we all should work forward.
So higher variants are doing better. That's another insight, contrary to the perception that the entry level will do better. Let's understand. We have seen that Rolls-Royce has also posted one of the best quarters in terms of sales. So that also says something different about the current situation. Kerala is one of the most important, you can say, the automobile market, be it the passenger vehicle, cars, or the two-wheeler. I just want to understand from John K. Paul. Mr. Paul, how do you see the customer sentiment there? What kind of change in terms of customer behavior you have noticed in the last 1 year?
Good afternoon, Nabil. So, I'll just go from the end of 20. That is the last quarter. I think other than Maruti, most manufacturers were still pushing BS4 into the market. Okay, and we were expecting that after March, immediately the BS6 vehicles will start coming in. Maruti all dealers had enough BS6 stock of almost every model. So we were all just, waiting for the chance to bring in the BS6, and then all of a sudden the COVID happened. Okay, and March 31st there was a deadline. FAD was fighting in the court to extend that deadline, and all those things were going on. But for the first quarter of 21 was very bad, as we all know, though at least in Kerala, the lockdown opened on May 4th, but till the end of June, things were pretty bad. And most of what we were getting more walk-ins in our service stations than at the showrooms, okay, because people were bringing it only for the necessary work. People were wary about buying new cars. But then as it went into the second quarter, people started realizing they cannot use the public transport as easily as they would have liked to do previously. So there was a push, especially for the two-wheelers. In the initial stages, there were a push. By the time it became the third quarter, I think things started changing. The sentiment started changing. More people started coming in to buy passenger cars like any other vehicle other than commercial vehicles. So the market started moving on. And by the fourth quarter, if you notice, we made up for almost all the loss. I mean, if you don't take 2% as such a big variant, I would say that it is probably the last quarter or the last 4 months that we made up for the whole market. Okay, and there we have noticed that the inquiry level is very, very high. And today, all over the market and all manufacturers, there's a pending list of customers waiting to buy. And that same push remains. I mean, the pull, I would say, the pull by customers for the booking still remains. And most dealers are very, very happy, with this situation. In between, there are one or two things that happened in the beginning of the first quarter of 21, when not first quarter, second quarter, as the market started opening up again, we were lying with stock which we couldn't sell because the first quarter closed down, and the banks were getting tight. They were not, pushing customer, rather they were not financing customers as easily as they would previously, and those things were there. Okay, but as we went to the next 2-3 quarters, supplies were not as predicted or as the customers wanted. So automatically all the stocks started going down, and hence, the pressure on the dealers by the banks for finding collateral and all that thing had gone down. So it became much easier for us to do business. We were able to find more customers and convert. Okay, so that situation still remains, and I would be still happier dealer if the stock still remains as low as it is today. Okay, so we are hoping, I think, I'm not me alone, but most dealers today are very positive that this is what happens. And as Mr. Taneja said, I just wanted to say one thing about the cooperation between our employees and the dealers. It really came out, because everybody knew that it was not in their hands. Whether the dealer wanted or not, he couldn't do anything. So the cooperation was very, very high. And that will take us into the future also.
Thank you, Mr. Paul. I'll come to you, Vinkesh, and understand from you holistically on the all India level, how the dealers are, confident in terms of, delivery of vehicle, because we see a lot of vehicles which has high demand, but has huge waiting period, upwards of 1 year almost, some 8 months, 6 months, 7 months. So what kind of assurance are you getting from the OEMs, and how do you see this second wave, impacting the footfalls? Have you seen some kind of impact on the footfall over the next 1 week or something? If you could give us a sense. Also, what has been the key aspect of last year that you have learned? Do you think, with the way we were talking about digital dealer, or we're talking about virtual dealership, how much of it you think is now going to be reality? Because this is the best situation to really understand if that is possible in India or not.
Thanks, Nabil, and good evening to all the viewers. Thanks for making my comment the last, so I've heard everybody. And let's put in. So guys, not very positive with the way how my pre-panelists have given. So I don't know if you all remember, I still remember the date. It was somewhere in August 19, we went to meet the finance minister because of the real degrowth happening in the market. And SIAM, all of the auto manufacturers were there with FADA and me, where we were discussing how to come up. So the finance minister was good enough to give some support, through which we got some redressal. But actually, we were looking forward to this year to give a good comeback after a degrowth of 1920. But obviously, due to COVID, this wasn't what we saw in the last week of March 20. And then further also, just the last year also was not that good from the dealer's side. So we were already grappling with the grim situation of degrowth. Around 15 or 18% we were talking on, and then we have currently seen. I am happy to see the numbers which have just come up, which is -2% in passenger vehicle and -13 in three-wheelers, two-wheelers. Sorry. So, but if we really analyze these figures, so like John said, Shashank said, Maruti was the only company which had handled the BS4 to BS6 transition very well. So even with the lockdown happening in March, only Maruti dealers had the vehicle of BS6 in their stock, whereas all other dealers, which is the major fraternity, so 50% is Shashank San, so 50% of passenger vehicle, and then take 100% of two-wheeler, 100% of commercial vehicle, 100% of three-wheeler. All the dealers were really in shambles. When 22nd March, we heard the Prime Minister announce the lockdown, we were the worst lot who couldn't sleep because we didn't know what to do with those BS4 stocks. You mean, so if you are talking of the industry of 1,86 crore, what we did in FY21, so think of 1,86 crore and leave apart some 2 lakh vehicle of Maruti. So talking of such huge vehicles sitting at the dealer's stock and which will become zero. So it's actually scrap. So I'm thankful to all of my industry friends, all of my co-dealer friends, and the Supreme Court judges friends. So like John said, we were happy enough to get some relief and give some relief to our dealers also. No doubt there are still a lot of customers on the ground, some sub-dealers, some dealers who are still grappled with that situation, but thank that we could come out of that things. So except for Maruti, everybody was carrying BS4 and no BS6. So if you talk of passenger vehicle -2%, leave apart Maruti, the rest of the 50% odd manufacturers had nil or negligible stock in the opening. So FADA will surely come out with an annual figure of retail. But you can easily say that if there is a 30 days stock of passenger vehicle at the dealers, which is the normal norm as of today, so -2 could be easily -11 or -12 on the retail front. So let's wait for the results. But similar, if you talk of two-wheeler, which is -13 on the wholesale front, would 100% be somewhere -25 or -30, which is not a good figure after a -18% what we have seen last year. So practically from the dealer front, you are talking of 35% of our retail going down. And lucky enough, most of the dealers are still there. So we are not saying that around 30% dealers are also shut shop. It isn't as of today, because frankly, COVID has really taught us well. So no doubt to that, the diversity, the problems also help us a lot to learn. The mistakes is the biggest learner. And we dealers have really come out well with those mistakes. No doubt, like Ashokji said, the OEMs have supported us a lot. In the panel and out of the panel, I would thank officially all the OEMs for the kind of support they have given the dealers to make us come out of this pandemic, and supported us so that a lot shutting shop hadn't happened. So this is all with their support. And like John said, our employees also were there hand in hand with us, and that has really helped us in facing this. Obviously, this current, the new spike which is coming, that's another thing to talk about. Coming to the digital front, on the Nabil Bhai, what you said. So obviously, the lockdown period of April and May saw a lot of digital things coming in, initiations by a lot of manufacturers and by dealers on their own also. So we saw a good time that in the 6 months from April to September, and a lot of inquiries were there. So normally 30% of dealer customer purchase process was through digital, which reached up to as high as 60% also. But seeing the current Indian processes where the compliances need customer physical signature and a lot of things, so we still had 40% of things happening physically, which during the unlock period, dealers went to customers' home and got it done and helped in the retail process. But slowly and steadily, I feel the things have gone back to normal. So if it was 25-30%, it has gone up to 30-35% only. So still the customers are coming into the dealership and taking the fit, feel, finish of the vehicle, and even asking the customer, the consultant, to get to have a cup of tea with them and discuss about other things except the vehicle also. So that's how Indian customers are. So, but one thing great has happened in this all process. We dealers have learned that places like Taj Mahal cannot work in our showroom culture. The manufacturers have also learned this well, and a lot of OEMs have come up with a small infrastructure concept. Some call it cube, some call it SIS, some call it different names, but that also has come in, which I feel is good for the Indian retail industry in the future. So obviously small infrastructure using all those VRs and digital fronts where the customer can have the best of the experience. Automatically the people hired in those small infrastructure will have quite a bit intellectual qualities as compared to this computer savvy and digital savvy. So things are on the right direction, and we are hopeful that whatever has gone through will not go through again, and things will be better for us.
Thank you so much, Vinkesh. We have seen during the course of the year, we have seen the big OEMs cutting jobs. We have seen Mahindra taking that step. We have seen Honda. We have seen a lot of companies. We have seen Maruti also. You know, there was a situation which brought down the capacity, certainly, that resulted into job losses also. Many small component manufacturer also, they went into heavy debt also. Some of the dealership also were shut down. We cannot say that they were not, and many of them had a very high debt. Even now some companies, a lot of dealerships are running under debt. I just want to understand from you, Ajay, can you give us a quick sense what kind of total job loss we had, what kind of investment cut we probably experienced in the last year that probably would have been invested traditionally, or you can normally?
I think investments possibly we didn't actually lose by much, because most of the industry had already invested into BS6 before the COVID itself. Yes, maybe to some extent, investments which otherwise would have happened in fiscal 21 or fiscal 22 or 23 has got slightly pushed forward because of the decline in demand. But job losses, I would definitely say that quite a bit of job losses have happened. Not so much in the, I would say, in the auto OEMs on the component side, the smaller components, if I look at tier 3, tier 4 vendors, and also on the dealer side, definitely there has been some impact.
Thank you, Ajay. Ashokji, you want to comment on this? Then I'll go to Mr. Gulleri. Yeah.
I have 2 or 3 comments.
Yeah.
The first one is that, economics alone does not determine demand or behavior. As Shashank very succinctly mentioned, it is also driven by sentiment. The second part of that is that challenges don't end, they only change. If we look at the situation today, the challenges are very different from what they were last year at this point of time. Last year, we were in despair. This time, we have hope, but there are issues on the table. Example, semiconductor shortage, commodity price increase, and its effect on the likely demand, because we are a very affordability-driven industry. The container shortage, and of course, the uncertainty due to possibilities of lockdowns. Now, given this reality, how did the component industry act? I wanted to comment on what Ajay just mentioned about postponing investments. Indeed, the component industry had completed its investments for BS6 and for the safety requirements already in 1920. But interestingly, the component industry continued to invest in 2021. They did not invest for capacity, but they have invested in automation. They have invested in digitization. They have invested in R&D. They have invested in upskilling and reskilling of workforce. They have made very big investments. They will not be visible to you as capital investments in the usual course. This is because we are not focused on the next quarter or the next 6 months. I think we have to take a longer term view. The long term story of India has not changed. It has only meant that we have to calibrate our investments differently. And we have to channelize them in different areas. I can also, specifically comment on this issue of digitization. You asked a question of Vinkesh about whether the dealerships are going to become virtual or are becoming more virtual than before. The amount of digitization which has taken root in the component industry is really praiseworthy. Investment in digitization in the supply chain, including for tier 2, investment in digitization on the shop floor, investment in digitization towards design, development, validation through simulation software. The entire spectrum is receiving more attention and more investment. Because the view being taken, and thanks to the inspirations, thanks to the confidence being given to us by the OEMs, all of whom are represented over here, we are continuing to put the investment in place. My last comment is, whether it was dealerships, or it was the OEMs, or it was the component manufacturers, we became more cost conscious last year. There was a war on waste. We recognized that it is possible to do business differently, digitally, for example, to reduce administrative costs, to reduce travel costs. We discovered that there are many things where we were spending money which we could do without. It was about events, it was about promotional activities. They could be done differently at lower cost. In the same way, the component industry has also become more cost competitive, more cost conscious and more cost competitive. And this will show up in the long term in higher exports out of India. I have not seen the numbers for 2021 for exports, but anecdotal evidence is that all the major exporting companies are doing better today than they were doing in a comparable periods last year, previous years. This China Plus One is another opportunity which the component industry has taken very seriously. And we find in all our dialogues when we get together, a lot more people talking about new opportunities outside of India. That is good news because scale will bring competitiveness. And that is going to define our future. So all in all, I would say many lessons learned, different solutions found for different challenges, but emerging stronger from the crisis. By and large, that is the story of the component industry today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mr. Guleria, if you want to make a comment, then we'll move to the traffic policy part and how much it will impact on the numbers.
Okay, I just take on from where Mr. Taneja has left. Definitely agree with you that this the SOP change into spirit of partnership but with a lot of new possibilities. And with the regulation of Indian auto industry almost matching many of the other markets across the globe, that gives us, more markets as a window of opportunity to export. But at the same time, when we talk about export and the quality level acceptance in advanced countries and economies which are ahead of us, the quality levels are different. And this is where all our component maker partners have really invested first with the confidence and trust which has been shown by the OEMs in reskilling or upskilling their own manpower in terms of not only machinery but the manpower, so that we are able to get those quality level components. At the same time, OEMs are also investing in skilling up their own manpower in terms of the quality control levels, so that they are acceptable to the level of quality which the advanced countries are looking at. So moving forward, and in another 2 to 3 years, definitely you will see that there will be much larger exports. I can talk about definitely about the two-wheeler industry. Even for Honda, there will be much larger export than what we currently doing. For example, for us today, it's only around 5% of our total volume, but it is definitely going to be much larger in our total business in terms of exports. That's what we are looking at as another opportunity. Secondly, even the China factor also has uh, given an initiative for spearheading or giving more agility to the efforts by the automakers here, including the component makers, to have more and more localization, even for the components which have traditionally been always given for granted that it is going to come from Vietnam or China, not in India. But those discussions, those thoughts have already started taking shape in the boardrooms, from the, only the, not only boardrooms, it has already started taking shape on the plans also, which will see the light of the day in another couple of years as India becoming an export hub.
India can become an export hub. That's an opportunity. Can India become part of the China plus one strategy? How strongly India can position itself to be the plus one when we talk about China plus one? But before we talk about the exports more, I'll try to understand from Nitin ji. Nitin ji, your segment of business, commercial vehicle, is going to be hugely impacted by the scrappage policy. I think it's a positive impact if we look at because a lot of companies will get into fleet modernization. Understanding the projection also from what Ajay just made, it's 30 to 50% growth on the previous year. Of course, the volumes are very less. That's about, if you look at the overall commercial vehicle, it's about 0.57 million units that we did last year, which is almost half of what the peak volume of 1 million unit that we had. Still a long way to reach that peak, but how do you see the journey of reaching that peak, looking at the 30 to 40, 50%, and what are going to be the key driver you think for this growth? Because you agreed that this growth is very much achievable. Mr. Seth, you are on mute.
Thanks, Nabil. I think the two parts of the 1 million journey was, it was 600,000 were light commercial vehicles. So clearly, if last year you ended up being close to 400 plus thousand, so you definitely, LCV is one area which is 600,000 out of 1 million. You actually definitely, it is projected to go back. So it's a question of only, it is 1 year, maximum 1.5, 2 years, you're going to go back, because two reasons. The big trucks are becoming bigger, and light commercial vehicle are playing a role for last mile connectivity. So therefore 600,000 coming back to LCV in 18 months time, I think it is very much doable. LCV has a very big role along for last mile connectivity and interest rate sensitivity. If interest remains low, LCV actually does very well, because these guys are individuals. MNSCV, I think there is a slightly a misunderstanding people have. What was part of that 1,350,000 Today, that 350,000 is different. For example, some trucks have become double their capacity. For example, if some truck was 20 tons GVW, today many trucks are 40-ton GVW. Now you're counting one truck to one truck. So you have to look at number of tonnages carried when you compare for the past. A lot of people confuse MNSCVB to, no, it was higher, now it is lower. Actually, trucks are carrying double the capacity because by law you have allowed more trucks to become bigger. So I think by tonnage capacity, MNSCV may never hit the 350,000 for next 3-4 years, but on tonnage carried, it might hit in next 2 to 2.5 years time. Scrappage policy will have a very big implication on medium and heavy trucks. May not be much on LCV because LCV boom, as you're aware, started somewhere close to 2003, 2004. So the very few vehicles of LCV which are beyond 15 years. There are many high quantity of MNSCV which are beyond 15 years. So one beneficiary for scrappage will be medium and heavy trucks. People will replace their older trucks with their higher tonnage MNSCV trucks. Modern is what we are expecting it to. The details are going to happen. Now you're going to detailing how this whole trading will happen, how certain, because the gentleman who's going to be actually scrapping the truck may not be the buyer of the new truck. He might trade his certificate with somebody else. But I think I'm expecting MNSCV to be beneficiary, but low tonnage truck will go out from the market to be replaced by higher tonnage. But LCV buses are two segment which will do very well next year. I'm just thinking that the COVID thing doesn't spread beyond April. There's no supply chain disruption because of lockdown. I think these two, and buses, I'm expecting state governments to go back. Government may give subsidy like they're doing for EV buses. They give subsidy to get the things going. MNSCV, at least in this segment, which are tippers and the other long haulage, should come back because GDP improves means manufacturing sector improves. If manufacturing sector improves, MNSCV is a big winner. But I'm still holding on to 30 to 50% growth next year.
Thank you so much, Nitin. I'll come to you, Mr. Srivastava, and understand from you in terms of passenger vehicle. Uh, uh, the scrappage policy, how effective is it going to be given the lifespan that is being talked about in the policy? Number one. Number two, the supply chain disruption has seen very heavily, especially because of the shortage of semiconductor. But I must say that Maruti Suzuki has been one of the companies that has really, really done well in terms of maintaining the supply chain. We have not seen much of impact on your delivery or supply when it comes to the products. They all are available in the market. We don't see much of a constraint, production constraint because of the chip. So what have you done to manage this crisis? Number one. Number two, how much do you see this scrappage policy helping you achieve the peak number, that is 3.4 million that we achieved? That was the peak volume that we achieved in India. How long do you think it will take for us to reach back there?
Yeah, thank you, Nabil. So I'll take the second question first, which is your question on the component and the semiconductor shortage. I think it was mentioned, one of the big challenges which we are going to face this year, and also I think in long term, is how to keep the cost of acquisition of the cars down. So you have a big challenge going forward. So while Taneja ji mentioned that if you look at the long-term Indian auto industry, with a very low penetration of cars per thousand, with a very good economic growth projected, projections are varying between 6 to 8% CAGRs for a long term. So long term, it looks really good, but we have to manage it well. And one of the things which we have to make sure, if our industry has to grow along the expected lines in the long term, is that we need to manage the cost of acquisition. And the cost of running also, by the way, is going up. The fuel prices are high. So that is a threat which we find in the short term. And obviously, there is an opportunity which Ajay mentioned about the alternate fuels, which is helping us as well. So we have to look at that long term separately and the short term separately. The semiconductor shortage is, I think, a more of a short-term phenomena because the capacities became a little awry because wrong projections being made by the OEMs across the world when the pandemic happened. And therefore, I think what Maruti Suzuki has done, we always try to, once we get a hint of what's going to happen, we keep monitoring and we just try to see how best to manage. As I mentioned, from just in time to just in case, we try to do that. One advantage we have is that we have a very wide portfolio. So there are the electronics in different variants of the same model, and across models is different. So we can sometimes adjust production from one model to or the variant to the other, and we could still manage it. You are right, very right, Nabil. We are at peak production capacities for the last 4 or 5 months. We have been operating at full production, still doing it, but we are keeping a very close watch on this semiconductor thing, which is a question of availability rather than on price. On the other hand, there is the other threat also, which is of the price of the cost of the material itself, whether it is rhodium or palladium, the precious metals, steel, plastics. So that is the other cost which we need to look at and worry about for the short term, both the cost of acquisition front, because it ultimately will be seen in the price hike. So that is one part which we are trying to do, and I think we are trying to manage it well going forward. I think it will have some effect, which we are evaluating as we go along. On the other question of scrappage policy, yes. So, and the question of when we will achieve that peak, which we saw in 1819, rather difficult to predict, as we all, I think, discussed various factors, very uncertain times. But one thing is clear, that it's been a good beginning. And in India, with the diverse markets and the geographies that we have, I think the beginning is very important. So you can, for example, debate, as you just said, is 20 years too long a time? Why should you incentivize somebody to get a vehicle which is unfit off the road? That could be a question. You could also question, what can manufacturers afford to give 5% or as an incentive, given the current scenario of cost structures and profitability? So those are clearly things which you can question, debate. But a good point is that at least it is there. And I think in India, as we go along and we see a lot of challenges, we see tweaking in the policy. So this 20 years might become 15 years. This 15 years can later on become 10 or 7 or 8 or whatever. It is possible that there can be no incentive and only a disincentive to continue to run these vehicles on the road, like you have in Japan, for example, very high cost of if you have to do a checking of the vehicle every 2-3 years. So I think the beginning is very good and we are very positive about it. And finally, to your question of when we will achieve those volumes, difficult to answer. I reserve that this thing. We still are looking at very uncertain times. As I said, cost of acquisition going up. And remember, with the fiscal deficits which Ajay showed in his slides, we could have interest rate spike as well. In fact, you already see a little bit of a spike when the bond buying is done in large amounts, and you could also see fuel prices going up, especially if the rupee comes down against the dollar. Ajay showed in his slide, I think, a 75 rupee projection for next year. So there are very uncertain factors. You could have liquidity, but maybe the credit availability might be a question. So these are many factors. I think we going forward, you can see a good projection. A long-term projection is easier to make because you can take care of the short-term thing. The long-term projection seems to be, if you look at CAGRs of 6 to 8% starting from now, with a base of about 22.71 lakhs, it appears to be 2030 volumes to be roughly in that range of 5.8 to 6.8 million vehicles. So that is the sort of opportunity. Surely at some point we will touch and surpass the figures which have been the high in 1819. It could be next year, it could be year after next, it could be depending on the situations and all the uncertainties.
Mr. Srivastava, I also want to understand, looking at all the implication and the raw material cost going high and the scarcity of chip also, there could be a problem, logistical problem also that could incur cost. Do we see another round of cost increase in passenger vehicle or automobile product?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely, because I think the extent of increase of both the prices on steel, of plastics, of precious metals, which go for the BS6, and also the impending norms of CAFE 2 and CAFE of CAFE 2 and CAFE 3, and the RD norms which are going to come in 2023. You can expect a steep increase in input cost and therefore the vehicle prices themselves. Remember Maruti Suzuki, and I think I'm very thankful to Vinkesh ji for mentioning Maruti Suzuki conversion from BS4 to BS6. It was all, we always try to meet the norms laid down, the regulatory norms laid down the government as early as possible. I was almost afraid Vinkesh ji would say that Maruti predicted the pandemic, but that was not so. That was our philosophy of meeting norms as early as possible. So thank you, Vinkesh ji, for those kind comments for Maruti Suzuki.
Arun ji, I just want to understand from you on the part of scrappage policy. Do you think it has any tooth to know all the hurdles that we had in terms of fleet modernization, or it's just for the name's sake? How comfortable the Indian manufacturer are going to be to dole out 5%?
This question is to me, or who is this question to?
To you only.
Okay.
You are a bit independent. You can answer it better.
Yeah. So scrappage policy, as Shashank mentioned, is a step in the right direction. But we have the announcement. The contours of the policy are still not very clear, and probably that 5% thing. So it's in the right direction clearly, but I don't see it impacting the market positively in the next 2 years, because the implementation will take time in terms of scrappage centers, fitness certification, coaxing, motivating, or pushing manufacturers to give 5%, and even GST to be taken in. So that's a challenge, clearly area, but it's a step in the right direction. And sometimes, as somebody mentioned, we do tweak our policies. But I think I would like to mention one thing, one very positive thing which has come last year and probably move forward is the dealer business model, which was under real serious threat last year, is looking more healthier. I still remember Vinkesh was in a panel discussion in the ET Auto only in May, and he was an angry young man at that time. Today, he's a more smiling, genial person. Although he's crossed the age of 50, he's not a young man anymore. But I think the model in terms of the infrastructure cost, in terms of interest cost, and in terms of operating the dealership in terms of activities events. So that's a positive thing. But I think one thing which is required very urgently, this increase which is happening because of safety, because of emission norms, and now the sword of CAFE norms hanging on our head. This actually impacts the entry-level market the most. So prices in percentage increase in entry level, and that's what we are seeing. So the chicken has come to roost. So probably the government has to see. Otherwise, this mass, the market we talked of high penetration, India's a growth story, there'll be some stops to it. Although Shashank said that passenger vehicles in 2030, we should go to 5.5 to 6 million. Inshallah, Delhi abhi dur hai, but I would like to go with him on that. But I think some serious step has to be, a serious thought has to be taken by the government, how to drive the motorization, whether of two-wheelers or four-wheelers. And digitization is clearly one of the unique steps being taken. But how can digitization just not being accelerated? It can be a game changer in our dealer model. That's also has to be seen.
Thank you so much, Arunji. Thank you so much, everyone, for such a wonderful insight. Before we close, we have only 2 minutes left. I'll quickly ask everybody's opinion in terms of what are the key drivers of growth that you see in 2022, and what are the negative hurdles that you see for the year? I'll start with Nitinji and then Mr. Guleri.
I think the growth driver will be consumption and the investment by the government on the various projects they will do, and economy will grow. If GDP grows, commercial vehicle will grow, and if interest rate remains low, which is likely to be, it will be a very good driver. What is likely to be derailer? Obviously, supply chain disruption in case COVID spreads. I'm expecting there will be lockdowns. Semiconductor, yes, it was picked up for BS6 but the biggest derailer can be increase in the prices because of steel, commodity, and the precious metals. We have done 2 price increases already in the last 6 months. Another one is happening in April. I think if this continues to the way it does, they're already talking about one more July increase by some of the steel companies. So I think this can be one of the biggest derailer, because we will have to pass on the price increase, which will lead to reduced demand. Thanks, Nabil. I will have to disconnect on Nabil. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mr. Seth. I would like to invite now Mr. Guleria to put his point now. What are the key drivers and challenges for this year?
Yeah, drivers, I totally agree with what Mr. Nitin just mentioned. So one thing I would like to add is the sentiments overall. There are certain things which are very, very emotional and they have to be clearly visible in the market. And second is about the COVID. We know the government and the local administration is making a very thoughtful action on the ground with lesser restriction compared to the previous lockdown, so that there's a minimum level of economic activity continues in the market. So that will also drive. But specific to the two-wheeler industry, our expectations are much higher from the contribution by the retail finance to spearhead and put some more agility to the two-wheeler industry, because still the penetration is very low at 42% compared to what you have seen in the automobile four-wheelers. And since the price points are going to be hurting the customers, especially in the two-wheelers, the contribution from the retail finance partners is going to be very, very crucial to drive the industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Guleria. I'll also try to understand, do you also expect a price hike again in two-wheeler space?
Yes, because even two-wheelers has a lot of metal into it, right? And rhodium is also there in the catalytic converter. So definitely we will see that there are big pressures on the bottom lines and they will be ultimately passed on to the consumers.
How much room do you have to pass on? Looking at the market situation right now, what percentage you expect, or what any number you could put it? I would also ask the same to Shashank.
See, percentage very difficult to mention. As you know, there are some commodities which are maintaining the price, but rhodium is skyrocketing. So it all depends, which metal or which commodity is going high. The rubber is also under pressure. So, but they will be definitely passed on to the market.
And you see, as early as April, May?
April already been done, Nabil. So
and there will be another round.
There will be another round, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Before I go to Vinkesh ji, Shashank ji, your point in terms of what percentage of hike we expect and when do we see after the April one? April, we are already seeing a hike, but after April, when do you think?
And also the positives and negatives for the next year? Or do I do it now?
Yes. That's also.
Okay. Okay.
Shashank's in a hurry.
No. Because it's one of those threats. So that is why I wanted to link the two. So on the price hike, we haven't yet done the April price hike, which we'll be doing very shortly, as we have announced, also informed the stock exchange. Going forward, I think it's difficult for me to give a guidance. We are a public limited company. Price guidance is actually not allowed. So, but I can only say that there would be huge cost pressures. And I think that is something which would ultimately reflect in price hikes. It's not sustainable for manufacturers to absorb all the price hikes. Remember, in January also, there has been a substantial price cost up. However, the price hikes up by manufacturers in January, certainly by Maruti, the weighted average was just 1.3%. Regarding the positives and negatives I'll quickly, because there's as you said, there's a shortage of time. The positive, of course, is that the GDP projections are good. 16.5% up nominal, 11% or so up for real GDP. That's good. Inflation 5%, roughly as projected, should be manageable. Second, the COVID sentiments, I think, are a little less negative, because it's a known animal now. So it's no longer the unknown, no longer the black swan. So although the swan is black, but we know how black it is. So we know there is a vaccination now. Third, I think the liquidity is pretty good. That's a positive. So you could expect good retail financing helping the industry. Fourth, I think the shift towards personal mobility will continue because of reasons of health and safety. And I think that's a positive for the passenger vehicle industry. Monsoons are predicted to be good. So I think the rural economy should still be good. We saw that the good Kharif sowing, 9% up, Rabi sowing also, I'm told it's 3% up. So that's pretty positive. And discretionary spending should go up. Those are the positive. And quickly, the negatives. One is the COVID uncertainty itself. You could see a lockdowns. I think somebody mentioned it. It could still be a game changer. If you have a very wide scale of infections, you could still see those lockdowns. Second, the fuel prices are very high. Continued fuel high prices could hurt because that makes the cost of running the vehicle itself quite high. Third is, I think the interest rate, while people said it will be benign, but I just feel that with the rate, the fiscal deficit and the bond buying, which RBI has to do, I think the interest rate, you can just go up. We saw it last week going up a little bit on the GSEC. Then the cost of acquisition, everybody has talked about it, whether it is because of the cost of material itself or because of regulatory changes going forward, whether safety or emission, CAFE 2 or RD norms. And finally, the supply chain uncertainty, both on the factor of semiconductors, as also in some special grade steels, and also the container shortage, which Taneja ji mentioned. I think those are the negatives. In balance though, with a low base, I think we can see a growth, which we discussed at the early part of this very fine discussion.
Thank you so much, Mr. Srivastava. Mr. Taneja, your take.
India is a domestic consumption-driven economy. As long as we are able to take steps to promote domestic consumption, we will see all wheels of the economy move in the right direction. Therefore, the biggest challenge that I see is not the commodity price increase, which may lead to an increase in price of vehicles and hence impact demand. I see availability of jobs at the bottom of the pyramid, which is where bulk of the consumption takes place. If you were to give 5 or 10 or 20 lakh rupees more to Mr. Shashank Srivastava or to Mr. Nitin Seth or to any of the panelists who are sitting over here, they'll put it in a bank. But if you were to give 10,000 rupees in the hands of an associate on the shop floor, he will go and spend it, buy something for his children.
Taneja ji, don't be so sure about me.
He's measured you.
Maybe John Paul and Vinkesh ji are the people you need to.
Shashank, I have an insight into your bank balance, so I can say that it's only growing. So what is really going to determine the strength of the demand, sustainability of demand, is going to be whether we can avoid this COVID-2 causing too much disruption. If there is loss of income, if there is uncertainty of jobs at the associate or lower middle class level, they will not consume or they will postpone what they have to buy. And that will impact, as I think my colleague Guleria-san said about the entry-level two-wheelers. So this is one. The second thing is, in terms of what I feel will drive this economy and this demand, without a doubt, the rural market, which is doing well, is one bright spot. So we can look forward to that leading to an increase in domestic consumption and hence demand. Good liquidity, overall GDP growth, because we have a low base. But in addition to this, deep localization, which has started in the component industry, cost consciousness, which has come in as a result of a new way of working last year, including working from home. All these factors which will improve our competitiveness will partly offset the increase in cost which we are witnessing due to cyclical factors. Commodities, as you know, move in cycles. What is encouraging is to look at the second-hand market. We sold 4.1 million cars in the second-hand market last year, which is 1.2 times or 1.3 times, I don't know, of the new car sales. And the rate of growth of second-hand cars is steadily moving up. This means there is a desire for personal mobility. There is a demand, there is a latent demand, which very few countries have got. Therefore, I maintain that our long-term story is intact. We may have some short-term hiccups, and we need not take them seriously, but only prepare for them. The biggest challenge that I see is we are still dependent on imports for electronic hardware. There is a lot of talk happening about creating capacity in the country, but it will be some years before we see that happen. Till then, we will remain import dependent on electronic hardware. It is something which we have to be mindful of. The second is there is some amount of regulatory uncertainty also. You know, we hear in the same forum, people talk about promoting alternative fuels. And in the same forum, they talk about going for 100% battery electric vehicles. It sends a mixed signal. Where are we going? Where do we want to go? Some greater level of certainty about regulation will enable a better transitioning into the future. This remains a challenge in my view. And finally, I would say that whether the China plus one opportunity will be supported by the efforts of many economies to close their borders to imports or to make imports restrictive, how will this eventually play out? Will we sign an agreement with Europe to facilitate our exports? Will we be able to do a similar agreement with USA? I think these factors will remain challenges. If we are able to overcome them, I remain highly optimistic about the component industry and the auto industry. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Taneja. Before I move to the dealer fraternity and then I go to Mr. Malhotra and then eventually Ajay gives his complete presentation on the detailed projection, I'll just bring you here, Mr. Srivastava. I just want to understand how do you see the shared mobility? We saw this going down almost 70% for in terms of sales to the fleet owners. How is it now shaping? Do you see some kind of recovery? Do you think that will recover further? Or you think there will be another round of hit there?
Question to me?
To Mr. Srivastava, then I'll...
Okay, sure.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So you were talking about shared mobility, which we saw a couple of years back going up dramatically. In fact, it was one of the reasons mentioned by a lot of analysts for the 1920 drop. Although the volume themselves is not so large. Last year, people moved away from shared mobility. And that was seen as a positive. I think going forward also this year, I don't expect shared mobility to see a uptrend, dramatic uptrend. Although the last quarter we did see a little bit of it going up because it's, I think, directly proportional to the fear that is generated by this COVID uncertainty as regards health and safety. My expectation is there will be an uptick in shared mobility, but not a dramatic one for this year.
Slight uptick. Thank you so much, Mr. Srivastava. Vinkeshji, what are your, from a dealer fraternity, from the retailer point of view, what are the key positives and negatives that you think for the year 2022?
So positives, we have seen all the industry leaders already give the message. And so last year was a low base. So obviously we'll be having a growth. But overall, it's still not what we want the figures to be. So still per dealer sales will be lower than even 18, 19 and maybe years behind. But one positive thing, what COVID has done is dealers have all become lean in the manpower, in the infrastructure. So slowly and steadily, like Arvindji said, viability is not such a big concern. No doubt, it is a concern because we are here to earn money and just not do the break-even part. but still, overall things have improved a lot. We have become very, very efficient. So even with a such a negative, or you can say such a low percentage retail as compared to last year's, we are still happy that we are able to sail through. What a near future short term issue what dealers as of today are seeing is the kind of, again, starting of intermittent lockdown. Sorry, not a lockdown. Uh, it's not a lockdown, but dealerships are shut. So it's something like this which is happening slowly and steadily. So this is where the problem is big. Like Shashank sir said, sentiment and the relation to sales is direct. So I feel like recently we have seen that fresh bookings have gone down drastically. If we compare not the last year, because last year was lockdown, but year before that, and demand is also slowly waning down. But lucky enough to the passenger vehicle industries, panelists, and passenger vehicle dealers, that there is still a demand of a waiting period of 2 to 4 months, 6 months, and some model maybe more. So it's not hurting us. But if we see the full industry, it is really hurting. So uh, Valeria San can give you the exact picture, but what I feel, two-wheeler is one of the biggest, two-wheeler dealers are one of the biggest hit because of all this. They haven't yet recovered what passenger vehicle has done last year. And additionally, April had not been good. Whereas April, the Navratri, and May, the marriage season is a good big booster to the two-wheeler sale. But seeing the current COVID spike and things are not looking positive on the shorter term. But overall, in the long term, I feel things will improve, and we are keeping our fingers crossed that maybe last year figures will easily be achieved. We are hopeful that we'll be able to achieve the year before last, and let's see when we can achieve 18-19 figure.
Thank you, Vinkeshji. Uh, uh, Gularia-san, you want to comment or quickly on the two-wheeler dealers situation?
Okay, thank you, Vinkeshji, for bringing me in to comment on two-wheelers. So yes, it was one period which we're looking at because it was the beginning of the year as well as the beginning of the festivities, and all were prepared well in terms of the activities on the ground. However, there's no meaning comparing with last April because no business. So we try to compare the statistics compared to March versus April, that April being a festival month. Already now, because of some lockdowns, 90% of the dealers only are operative as of now. So 10% is practically closed, and the biggest impact has come in the western region. And we all know Maharashtra alone contribute a lot to the auto industry, and in two-wheelers also more in double digit. And for Honda, it is almost 13% of our total sales. And the impact is as high as more than 50% drop in the inquiries has happened compared to March over April so far for the first 14 days. And considering this has happened in the festival month is very worrisome. So that's what I think Mr. Vinkesh was wanted to highlight, that on two-wheeler, this is what we are seeing, that overall, all India also around 30% drop has happened in the inquiries in the first fortnight compared to March 2021. And this is, but if you compare with April, everything will look positive. But yes, we have to look forward to how the effectiveness and efficacy of the vaccination drive is taking place. More and more people getting vaccinated, the herd immunity is being developed. I think from next time, please have the vaccination certificate for all before inviting us on the panel. Only
I will do that.
maybe somebody would like to say I'm not 45, so that is okay. But I think that is a minimum requirement to come on the panel.
I'm yet to enter that elite club. I will produce next time, I hope, if it is open for all. John, I would like to bring you in here. What kind of challenges you see for the dealers community? Is it going to be the finance big problem, or how do you see, what are the challenges that you face? We are talking about getting advantage of becoming a MSME, the new definition of MSME, I think, gives a lot of leeway to the dealership. How much advantage have you got from there?
Nabil, I'm basically a very positive person, and I feel from what is happening in Kerala, the demand has not gone down. Demand is still there, and of course, we all see the COVID, and as Mr. Guleria just said about the season time. I think these are all short-term effects. Probably another couple of months, you may face this in different parts, but not everywhere. But in Kerala, there's no dearth of demand right now, at least for passenger cars, and I think that is going to remain. We're just looking forward. So if West is closed, Mr. Shashank, you can give the South some extra vehicles, okay, so that our retail will go up. Anyway, I feel that within the next few months, all this will settle down and the demand will continue to grow. I think 2021, 21-22 is going to be a very, very good year.
Thank you, Mr. Paul. Before I hand over to Ajay for his presentation and projection to be completed, I would like to bring in Mr. Arun Malhotra to make his last comment, and he should have the last say because he analyzes the industry very minutely. Let's hear from him what he has to say, and then we'll conclude the panel, and I'll hand over to Ajay for his presentation.
So I'll keep it short in bullet points. I think it's been mentioned in detail by the other panelists. Clearly, one of the biggest drivers is the aspiration and the desire for personal mobility, which is still very strong in the heart of every Indian. And that is especially in the lower middle class. So that harbingers well. Second, which I think is the rural market is coming to its own in a very strong manner. And it's not only agriculture, it's also in terms of semi-agriculture production and other things. So these are the very positive sentiments which are there. The only challenge, which one is the COVID challenge, which I don't know how it pans out. Hopefully it should be a short-term thing. But I think one thing which is required is a very clear, focused government medium to long-term policy. Because a lot of times the auto industry is caught between the devil and the deep sea. And I think sometimes we need to also take a breath. Too many policy changes, too many variations, too many systems. So that's something which has to be taken care of. But overall, optimists like John, the woods are lovely, dark and deep, and I mean, we have a lot of promises to keep. And I think we can keep those promises, provided we don't get something basic things wrong. That's all we have to add.
Thank you so much, gentlemen, for putting out such an elaborate view of 2022, also picking out the key takeaways from the year gone by. Thank you so much once again for joining in ET Auto panel discussion. Please stay tuned for a very elaborate presentation by Ajay ji, who is going to give us more sense on what kind of growth, what kind of market do we expect in this year. Thank you so much, Ajay. Over to you. Also include your key drivers and challenges that you see that will be impacting the automobile sector in 2022. Thank you so much. Over to you, Ajay.
I think Nabil ji, most of my esteemed panel members had already covered most of the points. So I will not maybe spend much time, but I will actually try to give a sense on what is more important from a medium-term perspective. And I think this is very important to understand. I think while we are going to see growth in fiscal 22, we are not seeing that kind of job creation in the Indian economy. We are not seeing that kind of demand being created amongst the lower middle class. So those aspects, I think, is very important to be pertinent and mindful of. It's also because these are going to be the consumers of tomorrow. How do we create new models? For example, can we think of once this entire the demand for the personal mobility is catered in passenger vehicles, do we need to think of something like subscription-driven models, right? Because what we see is that the way the millennials, if I may call some, think today are very different from what the older generation used to think. Ownership is not the only thing. We are seeing, for example, in another sphere, consumer durables, buy now, pay later, becoming a very big craze, right? So is there a way to create innovative business models, looking at financing? So these are some of the aspects which need to be thought through, because clearly, I think while we are going to see revival in demand in fiscal 22, we are not going to see demand come back to fiscal 19 levels. And if I start thinking beyond this into fiscal 23 and beyond, then it's very important that there is A, clarity from a regulatory perspective, and B, also there is a lot of focus on trying to see as to how do we make sure that we have a well-distributed economic growth. Because today what's possibly happening is that there is one section which is not impacted and one section which is impacted, which is actually showing up in terms of the numbers as well. So that's how I would like to put it. I have already shared the numbers in the when I spoke first, so I don't want to go into details on the numbers. And yes, I think there are cost pressures which are very acute. We will have CAFE coming through next fiscal. A lot of the other issues related to the supply constraints will still be there. My panelists already spoke about the raw material pressure points which are there. And I think it's very important to then see in this context how to keep the both the affordability in check as well as make sure that the sentiment remains. And if you look at some of the data points, for example, if you look at RBI's latest consumer survey, it doesn't actually paint a very good picture. So clearly, I think it's going to be a mixed bag. And if you're looking at fiscal 22, 23 and beyond, it's very, very essential that we need to see how to make economic growth much more well distributed and look at bringing in larger segments. For example, even in passenger vehicles, we have seen huge demand for compact SUVs, but not so much in the entry level. So that very clearly is showing that there is a difference in the customer segment which is actually looking at these vehicles. Thank you.
Thank you so much again. Thank you so much, everyone, once again for joining ET Auto Live. Stay tuned to ET Auto for more news and updates on automobile industry. Thank you so much once again.
Thanks, Nabil.
Thanks, Nabil, for
Thank you, Nabil. Thank you all my
Thank you, everyone.
panelists.
Thanks.